The flash of cameras wasn't for a celebrity, but for the man who acted like he owned the city, Gideon Price. Standing beside him was his new fiancée, runway model Katrina Van Dorn, dripping in diamonds and disdain. They were the golden couple of Manhattan's elite, and tonight, at the Metropolitan Legacy Ball, they were holding court. But across the cavernous ballroom, a different story was unfolding. Charlotte Brewer, Gideon's ex-wife, the woman he'd discarded like last season's fashion, stood quietly in the shadows. He'd called her plain, unambitious, an anchor holding him down. What he didn't know was that this anchor was now carrying his child, and she hadn't come alone. The man who just placed a protective hand on her visibly pregnant belly wasn't just anyone. He was Rhys Devereaux, the reclusive billionaire tycoon whose name was whispered with more reverence than royalty. Gideon was about to learn that the woman he threw away was about to own his world. The divorce papers had felt as cold and final as Gideon's last words to her. "Lottie, be reasonable," he'd said, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd fallen in love with 6 years prior. They were in their sprawling Soho loft, a space she had painstakingly decorated with warmth and personality, but which now felt like a sterile museum of a life that was no longer hers. "We want different things. I'm on a trajectory, and you're content." "It's not a criticism," he'd added, which was precisely how she knew it was the deepest criticism he could muster. "It's just an observation. I need a partner who complements my ascent, not one who prefers to stay at base camp." Charlotte Lottie Brewer had been his base camp. She'd supported him when he was just an ambitious analyst at a no-name firm, typing up his reports, making his meals, and celebrating every minor victory as if he'd conquered Wall Street. She, a talented art restoration specialist, had put her own small business on the back burner to ensure his path was clear of any domestic friction. He'd climbed all right. He'd co-founded Price and Crestwood Capital, and his star hadn't just risen, it had gone supernova. With that ascent came a new circle of friends, a new wardrobe, and a new chilling sense of superiority. The final fracture wasn't a single explosive event, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the way he'd look at her simple, elegant dresses with a faint sneer, comparing them to the couture gowns worn by the wives of his new colleagues. It was the canceled date nights, the business trips she wasn't invited on, and the eventual gut-wrenching discovery of his affair with Katrina Van Dorn, a woman whose face was plastered on billboards across Times Square. Katrina was everything Lottie wasn't: tall, impossibly sleek, and publicly adored. She was a living, breathing status symbol. The divorce was swift and brutal. Gideon's lawyers painted her as a woman undeserving of the fortune he had amassed during their marriage. He called her support the bare minimum of a wifely duty, and offered her a settlement that was insulting, just enough to keep her quiet, but not enough to acknowledge her contribution. Tired, heartbroken, and utterly defeated, Lottie signed. She took the settlement, left the loft without a backward glance, and moved into a modest but charming brownstone in Greenwich Village, purchased with an inheritance from her grandmother. It was there, in the quiet solitude of her new life, 2 months after the ink on the divorce decree had dried, that the world tilted on its axis. 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test. A visit to the doctor confirmed it. She was 12 weeks pregnant. A quick calculation sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The baby was Gideon's, conceived during a last-ditch nostalgic night together a week before he'd officially asked for the divorce. Her first instinct was to call him, to tell him. But what would that accomplish? He had made his choice. He was with Katrina, their glamorous life splashed across every society page. Announcing a baby now would be seen as a desperate, pathetic ploy to win him back. It would be a weapon he could use against her, a complication he would resent. She pictured his face, the tightening of his jaw, the cold dismissal in his eyes. He would likely offer to take care of it, his version of a solution that would only involve lawyers and money, never love or responsibility. No, this child, her child, would not be a pawn in Gideon's game. This baby would be loved, wanted, and protected from the chilling ambition of its father. It was a secret she would carry alone. For the next few months, Lottie focused on herself. She poured her energy into her art restoration work, taking on delicate projects that required immense focus, a welcome distraction from the turmoil in her heart. She found a quiet joy in feeling the first flutters of life within her, a secret bond that was hers and hers alone. She had a small but fiercely loyal circle of friends, primarily her best friend Phoebe, who knew the whole story and acted as a one-woman defense system against any mention of Gideon Price. But Gideon was impossible to escape entirely. His engagement to Katrina was announced in Vogue, a 10-page spread featuring them on a yacht in St. Bart's. The ring, an obscene chunk of diamond, was dubbed the Price Diamond by the tabloids. And then came the invitation, delivered by messenger, its thick, cream-colored cardstock feeling like a threat. Mr. Gideon Price and Ms. Katrina Van Dorn request the pleasure of your company at the 10th Annual Metropolitan Legacy Ball. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Gideon's sharp, arrogant script. Lottie, I know we haven't spoken, but the committee insisted on inviting you. It would be a sign of no hard feelings. Let's be adults about this. Gee, Phoebe had snatched it from her hands. A sign of no hard feelings? He wants to parade his victory in front of you. He wants to show everyone that he's fine. He's better than fine, and you're a sad, forgotten chapter. You cannot go to this thing. Lottie knew Phoebe was right. It was a power play, a public execution of her memory. And yet a tiny, defiant spark ignited within her. For months, she had hidden. She had let him define the narrative of their breakup. She was tired of being the quiet, heartbroken ex-wife. She was about to be a mother. She was stronger than he knew. I think I will go, Lottie said, a strange calm settling over her. Lottie, no. What are you going to do? Walk in there pregnant and alone? He'll crucify you. Lottie smiled, a real smile for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Who said anything about being alone? The ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of excess. A sea of shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos moved beneath chandeliers that dripped crystals like frozen tears. The air buzzed with the clinking of champagne flutes, polite laughter, and the relentless, whispered currency of gossip. Lottie felt a familiar pang of anxiety as she stepped into the fray. She had chosen her dress with care, a deep emerald velvet gown, vintage Chanel, elegantly draped to accommodate her 5-month bump without overtly announcing it. To a casual observer, she might just look fuller, softer. But to anyone who knew her before, the change was undeniable. For the first hour, she managed to stay on the periphery. She spoke to a few old acquaintances, people from her life before Gideon's meteoric rise. They were kind, offering condolences about the divorce with averted eyes, unsure of what to say. Lottie navigated the conversations with a grace she didn't feel, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Then she saw them. Gideon and Katrina were holding court near the grand staircase, a circle of sycophants and photographers surrounding them like planets orbiting twin suns. Gideon looked impossibly handsome in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his smile wide and practiced. Katrina was a vision in a silver, backless gown that seemed to be spun from moonlight and arrogance. She clung to his arm, her head tilted just so, laughing at something he said. They were a perfect picture of power and privilege. Lottie's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to turn, to melt back into the crowd, but it was too late. Gideon's eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto hers from across the room. He whispered something to Katrina, a smirk playing on his lips. The game was on. They moved toward her, not with the subtlety of a predator, but with the brazen confidence of a king and queen surveying their domain. The crowd parted for them. The whispers followed. Charlotte, Gideon said, his voice smooth and loud enough for those nearby to hear. I'm so glad you could make it. I wasn't sure you'd come. Gideon, she replied, keeping her own voice steady. Katrina, you look lovely. Katrina's eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned Lottie from head to toe. The appraisal was swift, brutal, and dismissive. Thank you, Charlotte, she purred, her voice a low thrum of condescension. It's brave of you to show up. Truly. The insult, wrapped in a compliment, was classic Katrina. Gideon placed a hand on Katrina's waist, pulling her closer. We just wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings. Life moves on, you know. We're so incredibly happy. He emphasized the word happy as he looked directly at Lottie's midsection. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second. "You're looking, well, healthy." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was suggesting she'd let herself go, that her contentment had manifested physically. The people nearby shifted, their ears straining. This was the drama they had paid thousands for a ticket to witness. "I am healthy," Lottie said, her chin held high. "And I'm very happy too." Katrina let out a tinkling, artificial laugh. "Oh, that's sweet. Found a new hobby, have you? Pottery, perhaps? I hear that's very therapeutic." She glanced at Lottie's hands as if expecting to see clay under her fingernails. The cruelty was breathtaking. They weren't just content to have won. They needed to grind her face in the dirt. They needed a public spectacle of her defeat. Lottie could feel the blood draining from her face, the room starting to spin. The air was too thick, the perfume and judgment choking her. She had been a fool to come. Phoebe was right. She was outmatched and outmaneuvered. "Actually," Gideon said, leaning in as if sharing a secret, though his voice carried, "I'm glad I ran into you. My lawyers are drawing up the final asset divisions from the sale of our Hamptons place. Given your current situation," he said, his gaze again flicking down her body, "I'm sure you could use the liquidity. We'll be quick about it." He was flaunting his wealth, her diminished status, and insinuating she was desperate for cash, all in one slick, devastating blow. He was painting her as a charity case. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes. Her carefully constructed composure was cracking. She felt small, exposed, and deeply, profoundly alone. This was the moment he had wanted, the final public confirmation that he had made the right choice, that he had upgraded, and that she was nothing. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Her breath hitched. The circle of onlookers seemed to be closing in, their curious faces blurring into a monstrous whole. Just as she felt herself begin to sway, a low, calm voice cut through the noise from directly behind her. "I believe my partner has had quite enough of this conversation." The voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable authority that silenced the whispers instantly. A warm, firm hand rested gently on the small of her back, a silent anchor in the storm. Gideon and Katrina froze. Their perfect, smug expressions faltered. The crowd turned as one to see who had dared to interrupt. Lottie turned her head, her heart still pounding. Standing beside her, his presence a shield of absolute calm, was Rhys Devereaux. He wasn't looking at Gideon or Katrina. His deep blue eyes, filled with a concern that was shockingly genuine, were fixed only on her. "Are you all right, Charlotte?" he asked softly, his voice for her alone. The world seemed to stop spinning. Lottie could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Rhys Devereaux, the notoriously private CEO of Devereaux Aviation Dynamics, a man who hadn't been photographed at a public event in almost a decade, a true titan of industry whose net worth made Gideon's look like pocket change, had just called her his partner. He then lifted his gaze and for the first time, fixed it on Gideon. The friendly concern in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glint of polished, unyielding steel. "Price," Rhys said, his voice dropping a degree in temperature. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Gideon Price was a man who prided himself on his unflappability. He could navigate a hostile boardroom, charm a skeptical investor, and eviscerate a competitor with a smile. But as he stared at Rhys Devereaux, a man whose legend was built on corporate ruthlessness and impenetrable privacy, his composure fractured. For the first time in a very long time, Gideon was speechless. "Devereaux," he finally managed, his voice a little tight. He extended a hand, the automatic gesture of a man used to networking his way through any situation. "Gideon Price, an honor." Rhys looked at the outstretched hand for a moment before his gaze moved to the hand he still had on Lottie's back. He made no move to shake Gideon's. "The honor is all mine, I'm sure," he said, his tone flat, making it clear it was anything but. Katrina, ever the social chameleon, recovered first. She pasted on her most dazzling smile. "Rhys, what a surprise to see you here. I'm Katrina Van Doren," she said, practically purring. "Gideon's fiancée." Reese gave her a brief, dismissive nod. I know who you are. His attention returned immediately to Gideon, his eyes hard. You and your fiancée were just leaving. You've upset Charlotte and the night is long. I'm sure you have others to impress. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command cloaked in the thinnest veil of civility. The public dismissal was more potent than any shout. The onlookers, who had been leaning in with rapt attention, now took a subtle step back, sensing the dangerous shift in the power dynamic. Gideon, the king of the ball, had just been dethroned in his own court. His face flushed a dark, ugly red. Now wait a second, Gideon started, his bravado returning as a form of defense. Lottie and I were just catching up. We have history. Yes, Reese said, his voice dangerously low. A history that, from what I can see, gives you the absurd impression that you can publicly harass her. Let me be perfectly clear. That history is over. Her present and her future are with me. As he said the last words, he gently moved his hand from her back and placed it over hers, which was resting on her stomach. The gesture was deliberate, possessive, and unmistakably protective. It drew every eye in the vicinity to the gentle swell of her pregnancy. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the little crowd. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. Charlotte Brewer wasn't just with Reese Devereaux. She was pregnant with Reese Devereaux's child, the heir to the Devereaux empire. Gideon's jaw went slack. His eyes darted from Reese's hand to Lottie's face, then to her stomach and back again. The gears in his mind were grinding, trying to process an impossible reality. The mousy, unambitious woman he had cast aside was carrying the baby of one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. The healthy weight he had mocked was not a sign of depression, but of a new life, a life that would be infinitely more privileged than any he could have offered. Katrina looked as though she'd been slapped. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of shock and ill-concealed fury. Her entire future was predicated on being Gideon's ultimate trophy. But in the space of 30 seconds, Lottie had gone from being a discarded starter wife to the mother of a dynasty. There was no competing with that. Come, Charlotte, Reese said softly, turning her away from the scene. Let's get some air. He guided her through the stunned crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea. No one dared meet their eyes. As they walked toward the French doors leading to a private terrace, Lottie could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back. The whispers started again, but this time they were not of pity, but of awe, confusion, and frantic speculation. On the terrace, the cool night air was a relief. The distant sounds of the city provided a calming hum. Lottie finally let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. You didn't have to do that. Reese leaned against the balustrade, turning to face her. In the moonlight, the harsh lines of his face softened. They were being cruel, and you are the furthest thing from a person who deserves cruelty. Their connection wasn't a whirlwind romance, as the gossips in the ballroom were no doubt imagining. It had been slow, quiet, and profound. Reese Devereaux was a passionate, anonymous collector of restoration art. 6 months ago, he had commissioned her to work on a 17th century landscape that had been in his family for generations. He had come to her studio in the village, not as a tycoon, but as a man named Mr. Smith, a quiet, intensely observant man who was fascinated by the painstaking detail of her work. He learned of her divorce not because she complained, but because he noticed the sadness in her eyes. They started talking, first about art, then about life. He was the first person she had told about her pregnancy, breaking down in his quiet, unassuming presence one afternoon. He hadn't judged or offered solutions. He had simply listened, offering a strength and stability she desperately needed. It was he who had gently convinced her to attend the ball, promising to be her silent support from the wings. He had only stepped in when Gideon and Katrina had crossed a line. My partner? She asked, a small smile touching her lips. And the baby? Reese's expression was serious. A lie is only a lie if it's not what you want to be true, he said simply. I will be whatever you need me to be, Charlotte. A friend, a protector, a partner. You and this child will want for nothing, especially not safety and respect. That, I promise you. Inside the ballroom, Gideon was trying to recover. He was surrounded by people demanding answers he didn't have. I had no idea, he kept repeating, a pathetic mantra. She never said anything. But the damage was done. The story was already taking flight, carried on the wings of text messages and breathless phone calls. By morning, it would be the only thing the city was talking about. Gideon Price, the man who had everything, had thrown away a diamond, mistakenly believing it was a stone. And worse, much worse, a dawning, sickening realization was beginning to form in the pit of his stomach. His firm, Price and Crestwood, was on the verge of its biggest deal yet, a massive multi-billion-dollar logistics contract, a contract to exclusively manage the global fleet of private jets for a new corporate consortium. The lead investor and final decision-maker on that consortium was the notoriously discerning and now deeply offended CEO of Devereaux Aviation Dynamics. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By 8:10 a.m. the next morning, every major gossip column and society blog had the story. Page 6 ran the headline, "Priceless Mistake. Tycoon Gideon Price's ex-wife re-emerges pregnant on the arm of billionaire Reese Devereaux." Photos from the event, snapped by opportunistic guests on their phones, were everywhere. A stunned Gideon, a furious Katrina, and the serene, powerful image of Reese Devereaux shielding a pregnant Charlotte Brewer. Lottie's phone had been buzzing incessantly since she'd woken up. Phoebe had been the first call, screaming with such jubilant vindication that Lottie had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I'm reading it now," Phoebe shrieked. Sources say Price looked apoplectic, and that his model fiancée, Van Doren, appeared visibly shaken. Visibly shaken? Oh, this is better than Christmas. Lottie curled up on the sofa in her sunlit living room, a cup of herbal tea warming her hands, felt a strange sense of detachment from the chaos. Reese had ensured she got home safely, his driver navigating the city with quiet efficiency. He had simply squeezed her hand before she got out of the car. "Get some rest," he'd said. "Let the storm rage. You are in the eye of it, safe." He was right. For the first time since the divorce, she felt a profound sense of peace. The public narrative had been ripped from Gideon's control. She was no longer the pitiable ex-wife. She was a mystery, a woman of substance, aligned with a man of far greater import. Meanwhile, at the gleaming, minimalist offices of Price and Crestwood Capital, Gideon was living through a nightmare. He'd arrived at 6:30 a.m. to a barrage of texts from his business partner, Robert Crestwood, a nervous older man who handled the firm's legacy clients. The first text, sent at 1:12 a.m., read, "What the hell happened at the ball? My phone is blowing up." The second at 6:05 a.m., "Gideon, call me. The Devereaux deal. Is this going to be a problem?" The final frantic one at 7:45 a.m., "Gideon, I just got an email from Devereaux's office. They're postponing the final signing. Call me now." Gideon stared at the email from Robert, his blood turning to ice. The Devereaux Aviation Dynamics deal wasn't just a big deal. It was a make-the-firm deal. It was the contract that would launch Price and Crestwood into the stratosphere, solidifying their place among the Wall Street elite. It was worth billions, and the commission alone would secure his and Robert's fortunes for generations. And it all hinged on the approval of Reese Devereaux. He had spent 6 months courting Devereaux's second-in-command, a formidable woman named Lena Petrova. He had wined, dined, and schmoozed every member of the board. He had never met Reese Devereaux himself. The man was famously hands-off until the final stage. But he had been assured that Devereaux had been personally impressed by their aggressive growth strategy. The signing was scheduled for the end of the week, a formality, he had thought. Now that formality was postponed indefinitely. "It was a disaster, Robert," Gideon said, pacing his office like a caged tiger when his partner finally arrived, his face pale with anxiety. "A complete and utter disaster." "A disaster? Gideon, this is a potential corporate extinction event," Robert sputtered, waving a printout of the Page 6 article. "You humiliated the mother of Reese Devereaux's child? In public? What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking. I didn't know," Gideon roared, slamming his hand on his mahogany desk. "She never told me she was pregnant. I thought she was there alone looking for pity. And how the hell did she even meet Devereaux? The man is a ghost." "Well, she obviously did more than meet him." Robert gestured wildly at the photo of Reese's hand on Lottie's stomach. "Look at them. He looks at her like she's the crown jewels. And you look like a thuggish bouncer. The door to Gideon's office burst open and Katrina stalked in, her face a thunderous mask of rage. She wasn't wearing her usual cooter. Instead, she was in leggings and a hoodie, her hair scraped back, her model off-duty look doing nothing to hide her fury. "My agent just called," she hissed, throwing her phone onto the sofa. "The campaign for Vancorp Jewelers? The one that was supposed to be our engagement campaign? They're pulling the offer. They said they need to re-evaluate the brand's association in light of recent events. They don't want to be associated with a public spectacle." Gideon stared at her. "They're pulling a 7-figure contract because of some gossip?" "It's not some gossip, Gideon," Katrina shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's a story about you being a cruel, short-sighted idiot who discarded his pregnant ex-wife right before she shacked up with a man who could buy and sell you 10 times over. It makes you look like a fool, and it makes me look like the fool who attached herself to you." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Katrina wasn't just angry about a lost contract. She was questioning the value of her investment in him. Their entire relationship was a transaction, and the terms had just drastically changed. His mind was reeling. His business, his reputation, his fiancée, it was all unraveling because of Charlotte. The quiet, unassuming woman he'd thought he could crush under his heel had, without saying a word, brought his entire world to the brink of collapse. But then, a new insidious thought began to form. Lottie, the baby, Reese Devereaux. There had to be a way to spin this, a way to use this. He had a connection to her that even Devereaux didn't. He was the father of her first child. No, that wasn't right. He stopped pacing. The timing. She was 5 months along. They had divorced 7 months ago. The math was tight. But what if the baby wasn't Devereaux's? What if it was his? A slow, predatory smile spread across Gideon's face. The idea was absurd, a long shot, but it was the only leverage he had. If that baby was his, then Charlotte wasn't just Reese Devereaux's new partner. She was the woman carrying Gideon Price's child, and that made her his business. It gave him an in, a way to get to Devereaux, a way to save his deal. He looked at Katrina, his eyes gleaming with a new, desperate cunning. "Don't worry about the Vancorp deal," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get everything back. I just need to have a little chat with my ex-wife." Gideon didn't bother with a phone call. A call could be ignored, a text deleted. He needed the element of surprise, the advantage of a face-to-face confrontation where he could deploy the full force of his manipulative charm. The day after the ball, he drove himself to Lottie's Greenwich Village brownstone, a place he'd never bothered to visit before. He found the address through a private investigator he kept on retainer for opposition research. He stood on her doorstep, clutching a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies, a flower he knew she disliked because they were funereal, and rehearsed his opening. He would be contrite, concerned, the repentant ex-husband shocked into clarity. When Lottie opened the door, her expression was not one of surprise but of weary resignation. She was dressed simply in jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair tied back. She looked calm, centered, and not at all pleased to see him. "Gideon," she said, her voice flat. She made no move to let him in. "You shouldn't be here." "Lottie, please," he began, forcing a look of pained sincerity onto his face. "I know, I was a monster last night, a complete jackass. I saw the pictures, I read the articles. I was horrified at myself." He offered the bouquet. "I came to apologize. For everything." Lottie looked at the lilies, then back at his face. She saw right through the performance. This was the same man who had convinced her to invest her savings into a sure-thing stock that mysteriously went bust right before their divorce, a loss he'd chalked up to market volatility. She knew his tells. "You're not sorry you were cruel, Gideon. You're sorry you got caught." She crossed her arms, one hand resting protectively over her bump. "What do you want?" His facade faltered for a second. The directness was new. The old Lottie would have been flustered, perhaps even accepted the apology just to end the awkwardness. "I want to talk," he pressed, trying a different tack. "About the baby." Lottie, why didn't you tell me? A child, that changes everything. Does it? She asked, her voice laced with ice. Or does it just change your current business prospects? The jab hit its mark. He flinched. That's not fair. This is personal. This is about us. There is no us, Gideon. You made that perfectly clear 7 months ago, she said. And this baby has a family. It has me, and it has Reese. We don't need anything from you. This was his opening. He leaned against the doorframe, lowering his voice to an intimate, wounded tone. Reese, come on, Lottie. How long have you known him? A few months. Do you really think a man like that, a billionaire recluse, is going to stick around for another man's child? He watched her face, searching for a flicker of doubt, a hint of insecurity he could exploit. He found none. Her expression hardened into granite. Get to the point, Gideon. He took a deep breath. Time for the big play. The baby, Lottie. I did the math. The timing. It's mine, isn't it? He said it not as a question, but as a statement of fact, hoping to bluff her into a confirmation. You got pregnant, and instead of telling me the father of your child, you ran off and found yourself a rich protector. You're using him, and you're trying to cut me out of my own child's life. Lottie stared at him, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. She looked not angry or hurt, but almost pitying. You honestly believe that? She asked, her voice quiet. You believe that after everything you did, after how you threw me away, my first thought would be to use our child to get back to you? You think so little of me, but you think so much of yourself. She shook her head slowly. The paternity of my child is none of your concern. You surrendered any right to ask that question when you signed those papers and walked out of my life for a life you deem better. Gideon's frustration boiled over. The contrite act was failing. The manipulative probing was hitting a brick wall. He switched to threats. It is my concern. If that is my child, I have rights. I'll get a lawyer. I'll demand a paternity test. I will drag you and your billionaire boyfriend through the mud. Do you think he'll stick around for that? A nasty public custody battle? Before Lottie could respond, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened and Reese Devereaux stepped out. He was dressed in a simple dark suit, but he moved with an aura of quiet power that made Gideon, in his designer jeans and desperation, look cheap. Reese walked calmly up the steps, his gaze fixed on Gideon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Price, he said, his voice a low rumble of command. You were told to stay away. This is your only warning. My security team is 2 minutes out. I suggest you're gone before they arrive. They are not as polite as I am. Gideon balked. You can't threaten me. This is between me and my ex-wife. No, Reese corrected him, stepping to stand beside Lottie, a silent, immovable wall. This is between you and the mother of my child. You are trespassing. You are harassing her. And you are about to make the biggest mistake of your career, on top of the spectacular one you made last night. He glanced down at the wilting lilies in Gideon's hand. Get off her property. Gideon looked from Reese's cold, implacable face to Lottie's resolute one. He saw a united front he had no hope of breaching. Defeated, he threw the flowers onto the pavement in a pathetic show of defiance. This isn't over, he snarled, pointing a finger at them. Oh, I know, Reese replied smoothly. We're just getting started. Gideon stormed off, his mind racing. The direct approach had failed. He couldn't get to Lottie. He couldn't get to Reese. But his threat had planted a seed in his own mind. A paternity test. It was his only card left to play. He would get his lawyer to file the motion. He would force the issue into the open. As he drove away, consumed by his own scheming, he missed the look that passed between Lottie and Reese. It wasn't a look of fear or worry. It was a look of shared resolve. Gideon thought he was playing a game of chess, but he didn't even realize he was on the wrong board. The real game had layers he couldn't begin to comprehend. The official legal petition arrived a week later. Gideon, true to his word, had filed a motion to compel a prenatal paternity test, citing his sincere and deeply held belief that he was the father of Charlotte Brewer's unborn child. The legal document was a masterpiece of sanctimonious lies, painting him as a concerned father-to-be, cruelly kept in the dark by a vindictive ex-wife and her new powerful lover. The news hit the gossip columns like a shark hitting a blood trail, and the narrative Gideon had hoped for began to take shape. Public opinion, ever fickle, started to waver. Was the reclusive billionaire Rhys Devereaux using his power to intimidate a man who just wanted to know his child? Was Charlotte Brewer a scorned woman seeking the ultimate revenge? Katrina Van Doren certainly thought so, or at least she tried to. She went on a carefully orchestrated PR offensive, giving a tearful, exclusive interview to a sympathetic journalist. "It's been devastating," she said, dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a tissue. "Gideon is a good man who is simply trying to do the right thing. To see him slandered like this, to see her use a child, his child, as a weapon, it's heartbreaking." But behind the scenes, Katrina's world was crumbling. The Van Corp deal wasn't the only casualty. Other brands were getting nervous. Her golden couple status with Gideon had become toxic overnight. She was no longer the aspirational model engaged to a titan of industry. She was the other woman in a messy, down-market paternity scandal. Her carefully crafted image was tarnishing with every headline. The pressure began to eat at her. She and Gideon fought constantly. The arguments were no longer about his inattention, but about his catastrophic miscalculations. "You were supposed to be smart," she screamed at him one night in their sterile white apartment, the one that had been featured in Architectural Digest. "You were supposed to be a winner. Instead, you're in a public pissing match with Rhys Devereaux, and you're losing." "I'm not losing. I'm creating leverage," Gideon shot back, loosening his tie as if it were choking him. "Once that test proves the baby is mine, Devereaux will have to deal with me. The contract, the business, it will all come back to the table. He'll have to negotiate to get me to go away quietly." "You idiot," Katrina cried, a hysterical edge to her voice. "You think you can blackmail Rhys Devereaux? He'll bury you. He'll bury us." Katrina's panic wasn't just about her career. It was about a secret she and Gideon shared, a secret that formed the very foundation of his success. It was a secret that made the Devereaux deal not just important, but essential for survival. She started drinking more, her polished composure fraying at the edges. One evening, after a particularly vicious fight with Gideon, she called her one trusted confidant, a fellow model named Sasha. "He's going to ruin everything, Sasha," Katrina slurred into the phone, pacing her walk-in closet, a temple to her own vanity. "He's obsessed with this baby, with his ex-wife. He can't see the bigger picture." "What bigger picture, Kat?" Sasha asked, sounding bored. "So you lose a few contracts. You'll find another rich guy." "You don't understand," Katrina said, her voice dropping. "Price and Crestwood, it's not what everyone thinks it is. The seed money, the capital that started the whole thing, it wasn't his." She took a shaky gulp of her vodka. It was hers, Charlotte's, an inheritance she got when her father died. Gideon convinced her to invest it with him in an off-the-books fund he was managing before he went legit. He promised to triple it. So he lost it all. Every penny. A bad bet on a biotech startup. He was ruined before he even started. He never told her. He created a fake portfolio, sent her fake statements. The money he used to actually launch Price and Crestwood, he got it by leveraging his family's name and taking on a massive, high-interest loan from a very unsavory group of private lenders. He told them he had collateral he didn't have. The story poured out of her, a toxic confession. The Devereaux deal is the only thing that can generate enough capital to pay them back. The first payment is due in 3 months. If he defaults, they will destroy him. Not just his reputation. Everything. Katrina started to sob. "He told me all this when we first got together. He said it was a sign of his trust in me. He said we were partners in building his empire. But he's not building anything. He's just trying to stay one step ahead of the sharks. And now he's provoked the biggest shark in the entire ocean." What Katrina, in her drunken, panicked state, did not know was that Sasha was not a true friend. She was a paid informant for a notorious celebrity journalist. Every slurred word, every devastating secret was being recorded. 2 days later, the story broke. It wasn't in a gossip column. It was a meticulously researched expose in the New York Times business section. The House of Price: How a Wall Street Prince Built His Empire on a Foundation of Deceit. The article laid it all bare. The stolen inheritance from his ex-wife, the fake portfolio, the predatory loans, the imminent default. It painted a portrait not of a brilliant financier, but of a desperate gambler running a shell game. It cited anonymous sources, including one described as a close confidant of the Price inner circle. Gideon knew immediately it was Katrina's doing, a desperate act of self-preservation. The fallout was apocalyptic. The SEC announced an immediate investigation. Price and Crestwood's clients began pulling their money in a mass exodus. Robert Crestwood had a panic attack and was hospitalized. Gideon's assets were frozen. He was, in a single morning, utterly and completely ruined. That afternoon, a simple, legally binding response to his paternity petition was delivered to his lawyer's office. It was from Reese Devereaux's legal team. It said simply, "We welcome the paternity test. In fact, we insist on it, and we will be happy to cover all associated costs. We look forward to confirming with scientific certainty that Mr. Price has absolutely no biological or legal claim to the child of Ms. Charlotte Brewer and Mr. Reese Devereaux. Please let us know which lab you prefer." Gideon stared at the words, the world dissolving around him. It wasn't a bluff. They weren't scared. They wanted the test. And in that moment, he finally understood. The child was never his one last, desperate gamble. The only card he thought he had left to play had been a figment of his own arrogant imagination. He had not only lost his company, his fiancée, and his reputation, he had lost a war he never even knew he was fighting. The paternity test was a quiet, clinical affair, a far cry from the media circus Gideon had envisioned. It was conducted at a private lab, with lawyers from both sides present. Lottie was the picture of calm, her hand held steadfastly by Reese throughout the brief procedure. Gideon sat across the room, looking haggard and defeated. He had lost a noticeable amount of weight, and the designer suit he wore hung on him like a shroud. The results came back in 48 hours, delivered electronically to the respective legal teams. The probability of Gideon Price being the biological father was 0.0%. A second page confirmed, with a probability of 99.99%, that Reese Devereaux was the father. The public reveal wasn't a splashy headline. It was a quiet, dignified press release from Devereaux's office. The results of the court-ordered paternity test have confirmed that Reese Devereaux is the biological father of his and Charlotte Brewer's expected child. They consider this matter closed and will be making no further comment as they joyfully await the arrival of their baby. The statement was a final, elegant nail in Gideon's coffin. He wasn't just a financial fraud. He was a delusional fool who had tried to claim a child that was never his. The last vestiges of public sympathy evaporated. He became a punchline in late-night monologues, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Katrina had already fled to Europe, issuing a statement that she had been gravely misled by Gideon and was taking time to heal from the betrayal. The unsavory lenders, now certain they wouldn't be getting their money, initiated legal proceedings that would likely see Gideon facing not just financial ruin, but prison time. His empire was dust. A month later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Lottie was in her art studio, putting the finishing touches on the 17th century landscape that had first brought Reese into her life. The room was filled with the scent of turpentine and old canvas, a smell she had always found comforting. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Reese walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his hands on her now very prominent 8-month bump. The baby kicked in response. "He likes it when you're here," Lottie said, leaning back against his chest. "He has good taste," Reese murmured into her hair. He looked at the restored painting. "It's beautiful, Charlotte. You brought it back to life." "That's what I do," she said softly. "I find the beauty in things that others have discarded." The unspoken parallel hung in the air between them. Their story wasn't what the world thought it was. Their relationship hadn't been a whirlwind affair born from her divorce. The truth was simpler and far more profound. After she discovered her pregnancy with Gideon's child, she had been terrified and alone. She'd confessed everything to Reese, her quiet friend and patron. It was Reese who had stood by her, offering not just financial support, but unwavering emotional solidarity. He had promised to protect her and the baby, to love the child as his own, no matter what. But as the months passed, their friendship had deepened into something more. They had fallen in love not in a storm of drama, but in the quiet moments, sharing tea in her studio, walking through Central Park, talking for hours about art and life and the future. One snowy evening, he had confessed that he was infertile, a secret he had carried for years. Her pregnancy wasn't a complication for him. It was a gift he never thought he could have. He wanted to be a father to this child in every way that mattered. The idea of the paternity test had been his. "Let's give him the fight he wants," Reese had said, "but let's make sure it's on our terms." Using a private, cutting-edge fertility clinic in Switzerland that Devereaux Aviation ferried clients to, they had undergone a revolutionary and still largely experimental procedure, a form of in utero gene therapy and DNA transfer that had, for all intents and purposes, overwritten Gideon's genetic markers with Reese's. It was a wildly expensive, medically ambiguous, and legally gray procedure. But it had worked. The child she carried was now, scientifically and legally, Reese's son. It was a secret they, and a very discreet Swiss doctor, would carry forever. Gideon had not been lied to about the timing. He had been scientifically and strategically erased. "Have you heard from him?" Lottie asked quietly. "His lawyers are trying to negotiate a plea deal," Reese said. "He'll likely serve a few years. When he gets out, he'll have nothing." Lottie felt a brief, fleeting pang, not of pity, but of a strange sorrow for the man she had once loved. A man so hollowed out by ambition that he had destroyed himself. He had been so obsessed with her past, he never stopped to consider that she was building a future he couldn't even imagine. She turned in Reese's arms, looking up at him. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible." "Charlotte," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you were never invisible." He was just blind. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss filled with the promise of quiet mornings, shared laughter, and a life built not on status or power, but on a foundation of genuine love and unwavering respect. Their legacy wouldn't be a headline. It would be the family they were creating, a masterpiece they were restoring together. Lottie's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by those who leave us, but by the strength we find within ourselves and the people who choose to stand by us. Gideon Price saw her as a stepping stone he could discard, but he failed to see the resilience and grace that made her invaluable. He thought power was about public perception and financial dominance, only to be undone by the quiet, unshakable power of a man who valued a person's character over their connections. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of rebirth, of finding an authentic, loving partnership in the ashes of a toxic one. What did you think of Gideon's ultimate downfall? Was his fate deserved, or was the secret twist a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspective on these intricate stories of life, love, and sweet, sweet karma. And if you were captivated by Lottie's journey from heartbroken ex-wife to the unshakable partner of a tycoon, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story of triumph, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.